Welcome to Slow News Day Live. My name is Steve Boykin, and I am here in sweltering lockdown Boulder Creek, California. I love it when Elizabeth+Vos is on the show. I think you've officially surpassed Ron Placone as the most frequent flyer as of this appearance. If you don't know Elizabeth, she's a freelance writer, and she's the co-host of Consortium+News Live. They have a just tremendous program there. So if you're not subscribed to that, you should do that. And welcome back to the show, Elizabeth+Vos. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me again. It's always good to be here.
Hell yeah. So the other day I was watching CN Live, because I do, and it's, I don't just bullshit about it being a fantastic show. And you guys had Ray+McGovern and Bill+Binney on. And the previous day I had Ray+McGovern on here. And so it was kind of funny because I only counted like 2 times when he told the same story, which is rare, I think. But Bill had his lucky interview shirt on. And he dropped a theory that fairly early on into the broadcast too, about who Guccifer 2.0 might be. And if you would just kind of walk the folks at home through the origins of Guccifer 2.0 and what kind of happened as a result of it, and then we can get to Bill's supposition.
Sure. So basically, though, I'd like to just preface this by saying that, I've reported on this a lot, but the real credit for the interview that we had with Bill and Ray has to go out to Adam Carter, whose real name is Tim Leonard, and to the Forensicator, because their combined work on Guccifer 2 in the last few years has been incredible and amazing, and the work I've done couldn't have been possible without that. So I just start with that. And also I'd like to add that, it's interesting because the work Adam Carter's done and the work that Forensicator has done, they've both differed in slight ways, but significant ways from VIPs and from what Bill and Ray have to say. So I think it's important also just to separate those two. They don't really, it's not like there are any major conflicts. It's just that they've done separate analysis. Ray+McGovern and Larry Johnson did an analysis of the DNC emails that's completely separate to like the NGP van stuff. So I know that's a little bit ahead of myself, but I just wanted to get that out of the way. So basically, I believe it was June 12th of 2016, Julian Assange announced that he had emails or content that would be published by Wikileaks that would relate to Hillary Clinton. And so within 2 days of that, you have a Washington Post article published that announces and quotes Crowdstrike and the DNC, specifically W. Wasserman Schultz, alleging that the DNC had been hacked, their service had been hacked, and that a Trump opposition report document had been stolen. So that was a specific allegation within 2 days of Julian Assange's announcement that they had Hillary Clinton-related material. Within a day or two of that, you have Guccifer 2 pop up with his WordPress site. And lo and behold, he publishes, or the persona publishes, this Trump opposition report that is then later found to have quote-unquote Russian fingerprints. And so a lot of analysis was then done by Forensicator, by Adam Carter, by others, on what these Russian fingerprints really indicate. And what they found, and I'm trying to summarize as best I can, is that it looks like they were deliberately inserted to make it look like a Russian had their fingers on this document. And so there's that part of it. Then there's also the part of it where we have indications on one of the documents published, one of the sets of documents, the NGP van files published by Guccifer 2. There are indications that was downloaded, not hacked. And so that is kind of the 30-second, in a nutshell, kind of discussion of Guccifer 2. And then in Adam Carter's recent piece published with Consortium+News, he basically summarizes 3 years of work on his end, and he discusses the overall thesis that Guccifer 2 as a persona was intended to smear and preempt WikiLeaks, whether it was by feeding WikiLeaks bad information, whether it was by suggesting Assange had links with Russians, which why would a Russian hacker suggest Assange was connected to Russians, or whether it was to potentially preempt Assange possibly naming Seth Rich as a source. You had Guccifer 2 message Robin Young and say, "Oh, Seth is my source," and that was within a few days of Assange going on Dutch television and indirectly discussing Seth Rich's death. So there's a whole lot to this story. And what I think Adam Carter really did, with a lot of factual evidence, show is that the main angle Guccifer as a persona really seemed to take was to smear WikiLeaks. And then you move on to the analysis and the memos published by VIPs, the discussion by Ray+McGovern and Bill+Binney across social media and on different platforms for many years about their take on the whole incident. And you have, just a few days ago, you have Ray and Bill discussing this idea of Brennan and Clapper being behind that persona. And I think to comment on that, I would also say that it kind of, in my mind, would tie over a little bit to the Russian collusion narrative, because you have Brennan going over and talking to the GCHQ's head at the time, right around the time that the Mifsud stuff was happening, on and on and on. So there are a few different threads there that kind of mingle around the Guccifer stuff and then the collusion stuff based on Joseph Mifsud. So, but I also think that it's interesting that Adam Carter has said in a few different pieces that, it's also possible that somebody like Sean Henry of CrowdStrike could have been behind Guccifer. Now, he doesn't claim that as a fact. He doesn't really say like he has proof of that, but it's a suggestion that I think is also worth discussion. So that's in a nutshell kind of the issue.
And let's not forget that Brennan and Clapper are 2 out of the 3 people who made up all 17 intelligence agencies agree about this. And then we find out, a month or so down the road, no, it's not 17 intelligence agencies. It's 3 representatives from 3 intelligence agencies. And, it's Clapper and Brennan and Comey. And it is kind of interesting to think about Sean Henry as Guccifer, particularly in light of, and this is where Bill's theory comes into play, the Vault 7 releases disclosed that the CIA had the ability to go in and leave these fingerprints to make it look like they were coming from another source or originated in another country. And as the Russian collusion narrative was building, it became sickeningly fashionable to try and tie WikiLeaks to the Russian government, or specifically the GRU, and the suggestion from Guccifer 2.0, the persona itself, that there may be a connection between WikiLeaks and Russia. It became reported on as gospel truth by, even people in independent media were running with that narrative, and even, quote unquote, like more woke presidential candidates to this day, like Marianne Williamson, are still running with that narrative. I think Howie Hawkins has tried to walk back his Russia gating a bit, but to me that seems more like political expediency than any sort of decision to switch his thinking on it because of new information. I don't know how much you pay attention to the Green Party nomination or anything like that, but do you have any thoughts about Howie Hawkins in general? And we can come back to Guccifer.
Well, I think like some others in the independent media sphere, I've kind of given up on electoral politics as a route of real change. So I haven't paid super close attention to it. I am aware of Howie Hawkins' Russiagate, statements, and so I'm not super enthusiastic about him as a Green Party candidate. But that's just my personal feeling about it, and I'm not attempting to punch at him or anything like that. But I think that it's also interesting, though, to talk about politics and elections, and the fact that so many people claim that Russia was influencing U.S. elections. Because you always have to bring it back to what was this designed to deflect from? It was designed to deflect from the cheating of Bernie Sanders by the DNC in 2016, which was revealed to a large extent by WikiLeaks. It was also revealed by the DNC fraud lawsuit and those proceedings. Those are the things that have not been reported on in the press for 3 going on 4 years. And that's why we're sitting here talking about Guccifer 2 still, is because that was used as a deflection narrative to talk about a type of hacking of the election that never happened. But the elections are faulty. They are corrupted at this point to a huge extent. But we just, that entire discussion that should have happened in the last 4 years about that just hasn't existed. And it's a huge shame.
Oh, you're so right. And it is. I mean, the entire I don't know, strategy behind Russiagate. First of all, was because Hillary Clinton's connections with Russia and Uranium One were proven, or they determined, the DNC determined, and her campaign determined that they were her biggest liability. So, in true Karl Rove form, they took that liability and immediately put it on their opponent, who probably had a disproportionate, including according to his son, had a disproportionate amount of business dealings with Russian banks. But that was like really the extent of any sort of quote unquote collusion. We found out through the Mueller report, through that the entire conspiracy just fell on its face and continues to do so. In that, what's his name? Rick Grinnell leaked the transcripts from all of the witnesses interviewed in the Flynn investigation. And one of them was Sean Henry, who is CrowdStrike's CEO. And there's a little bit of history with Sean Henry and WikiLeaks. And if you want to kind of break that down, we can discuss it a little bit.
Well, I think actually Adam Carter's done a great job of discussing Sean Henry. I would refer to his work because he's gone into the history of Sean Henry's connections with Sabu and that type of thing, which I think viewers should probably read up on. There's a whole lot of information, but basically Sean Henry, I would say, has a very checkered past when it comes to anything WikiLeaks related, and I believe he also worked under Robert Mueller at one time as well regarding cybersecurity. So he's got a very, very long past. It's very sketchy.
And the idea that Sean Henry was Sabu's handler and that CrowdStrike may have been his reward for being able to put a grinding halt to what Anonymous had been doing. It certainly fits. That's a pretty common way to be promoted coming out of the FBI, is to get on board of one of think tank or lobbying organization, or something to do with cybersecurity. It mirrors in a lot of ways the way the Israel's Unit 8200 operates. And yeah, I can't stress enough to the people that are listening right now, like, we don't know 100% that Sean Henry was Sabu's handler. According to the article by Adam Carter, it's down to like him and one other person. We've got that up on screen right now too, so that they can take a look at it. And I'll throw a link in the chat here in a moment. But out of the entire FBI, or the entire cybercrimes division of the FBI, there's you can pick from one of two people, and one of those people worked for Bob Mueller, is thought to be Sabu's handler, and is currently the CEO of CrowdStrike. And he's under oath saying, well, we didn't actually see any data that had been exfiltrated by the Russians, but we believe that it was because of what we saw. Which is
what word salad, really. and that goes against their initial wording about everything. They don't not only said this DNC had been breached, they also said that the specific document XYZ had been stolen. So to see that testimony was absolutely, incredible. And that's obviously why we're having this discussion today. And that's why this is returned to the news cycle, is because of that the revelation of that testimony. But even before that, we had a redacted draft report by CrowdStrike that was then submitted to the FBI. That was the only evidence that they had to begin with before this statement came to light. So it's always been entirely shaky. It's always been absurd and ridiculous, but it just hasn't been covered by mainstream press at all.
At all. They were reluctant to admit that the report that CrowdStrike sent was redacted by CrowdStrike. Like, that had to be pried loose, and it was independent media that did that in the first place. The amount of protection that it's almost like a goddamn mafia racket where the media act as muscle for inept or overconfident, as Ray had suggested, very overconfident collaborators who were so positive, I guess. It was way too long of a pause for that word. But so goddamn sure that Hillary Clinton was going to be the president that these guys weren't even bothering to cover their tracks very well. They weren't bothering to, backstop their stories. The stories fell apart on even the most casual examination, and yet to this day, there are people walking around believing the Russians hacked our freedom and gave us the orange bad man.
Exactly. No, it's absolutely ridiculous. And it's been really laughable to see the press, when Guccifer 2 was sort of punctured as a narrative, they just deflected straight over and, switched the bait over to the collusion investigation. Then a couple of months would pass and they'd throw Guccifer 2 back into the narrative. It's been a really educational view of propaganda in progress the last 4 years, just on that narrative alone. It's been a sight to behold.
You're not kidding, man. I'm gonna write down propaganda in progress. I think I might title that episode. There we go. We have a question in the chat about what our thoughts on the draft Jesse Ventura campaign might be, and just before I get your answer, like personally, I don't think that a septuagenarian, regardless of their opinion, is what the country needs. I don't. There's some things that I like about Jesse Ventura, and there's plenty of things that I don't like about him. But if we collectively as a country can't do better than like 3 or 4 old ass white dudes who maybe would help, but likely will capitulate to the national security state, we're fucked.
Yeah, I would agree with the last statement completely, but I think that I think Jesse Ventura is an interesting potential candidate. I wouldn't be unhappy to see him run, mostly because not because I think he would successfully get elected, and not because I believe that through election he would get anything done policy-wise, but simply because I think he would add some good thoughts to the conversation that we have nationally. And I think that's the only thing you can really get out of a political campaign these days, is to bring up some salient points. And similarly, I think that's really, for that reason, I think it's really great that Chris Hedges has thrown his hat in the ring for a congressional race in New Jersey. I think that's amazing too. Not because because I think that the election he'll face will be fair or that he'll be elected, but simply because having his voice in the news more often than it already is a great thing. Because Chris Hedges is a great voice in our political sphere. So.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And Josh, if you could pull up the okay. Well, there's a delay on my phone, so fucking sassy fucking tech guy. But yeah, no, it I mean, look, it is good. As far as Jesse Ventura is concerned, like, he would be way harder to handcuff to a chair for 8 hours during the debate, like they did with Jill Stein. And that alone on its face, like, watching like 6 mook security guards try and hogtie Jesse V to a chair, that would be entertaining as fuck. It would be. But where Hedges is concerned, it's, I mean, more of that needs to happen. It's just so far, like, I did not see that coming. I never would have thought in a million years that Chris Hedges would run for office, but here we go.
Well, and especially because he's one of the foremost voices telling the public that, look, electoral politics is not where you're going to really see any change. So I don't think, and this is just my opinion, I don't know what Chris Hedges, what his opinion or thoughts are behind his reasoning for running, but I would speculate that it may not be so much to get into office and to actually, have some policy, but more to bring attention not only to what needs to change policy wise, but also potentially to the fraudulent state of election systems as a whole. I mean, we saw the same thing with Tim Canova. He didn't win, but his election his campaign and the response by the DNC to his campaign, the lack of prosecution of people like Brenda Snipes in response to his being cheated in his campaign, were exceptionally valuable. I mean, that particular instance woke me up completely, in addition to Bernie Sanders being cheated in 2016, to the reality that elections are just not where you're going to get any change. They are not in this right now in 2020.
Watching just boxes of ballots get loaded into the back of an Enterprise rental truck with there's no affidavit attached to it. There's no second person. There's no verification. They're just getting hucked in this thing, and then finding ballots in closets and finding ballots, just fucking buried in coffee cans, and they did everything possible but walk up to Tim Canova and shoot the guy. And the odds of him only getting 5% of the vote across the board, no matter Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever, the odds of that, he said, are like getting attacked by a shark while being struck by lightning on land.
Exactly. And it's not only that cheating, it's not only the overt level of cheating, it's also the fact that Snipes was not prosecuted, the fact that nobody in the House responded to Tim Canova's message to the House committee to investigate what happened. It's the resounding silence in response to it from politicians, from the justice system, from the media. That's the real indication in my mind of how far things have devolved.
Yeah, and I mean, even the people that normally bitch about this kind of stuff were absolutely just dead quiet about it. And I feel like every time I talk to you, I'm like, if that's not enough to get people activated, I don't know what it just. There's more and more and more that's thrown right in everybody's face that this is a fraudulent system, that it's a system that even if we had viable third and fourth parties, they would still be doing everything under the sun to rig those votes. We've got fucking Dementia Joe, who has like never met a 12-year-old girl he won't grope, who apparently like shit himself on camera today. I saw something about that out of the corner of my eye.
Wow.
No, he was doing some kind of interview, and like mid-sentence there is a noticeable sound that could really only be one thing, and he just kind of gets a little weird look on his face and kind of keeps going. But like, liberals, is this your guy, really? Like, that's who you're gonna put up against a professional troll? And they're still, I see the same fucking reports as in 2016. Joe Biden is guaranteed a victory,
right?
Written by Nate Silver and Cenk Uygur. I mean, fucking
yeah,
I don't
understand. No, it's beyond absurd. It's kind of beyond parody at this point. You can't really satirize this. It just self-satirizes. It just reduces me to silence at the moment. But
it's why I tell people that we live in a fucking cartoon. I mean, there's a guy who literally praises segregationists and wrote the fucking 94 crime bill and the precursor to the Patriot Act, and supported the bank bailout, but also co-wrote a bankruptcy bill that destroyed people's lives. And he's the guy that's going to square off against Donald Trump. Like, as sad as it is, because we have a system based on fraudulent elections that only rewards pre-selected candidates from dead-eyed sociopaths and fucking technocrats. The potential of a presidential debate between those two. Like, as sad as elder abuse is, I feel like there's going to be some at least parody worthy moments. Um, and there's no, like, even if for some reason Jesse Ventura does allow himself to be drafted, I don't see them putting Jesse Ventura on the same stage as Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Like, that would be a massacre of a completely different kind.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think there was one thing I wanted to add on the whole, election integrity subject, and that is that even as recently as 2004, we had the whole recount in Florida issue, and so at least at that point, yeah, elections were very, very murky, but at least there was media coverage of the fact that it was murky. At least that was actually something that mainstream media covered. But you fast forward to 2016, 2018, into this case, not a word. Not a single word. And so I think that there is a lot of people will say, oh, it's always been this bad. And in one way, it really has. It's just been less obvious. But in another sense, it really has gotten a lot worse, not because the elections have gotten more corrupt, really, but because our response to it culturally is just completely deadened. It's just completely silent.
And we were talking about this a little bit last night on the vigil. Sean O'Brien was on, and if you're watching right now and you didn't watch, he hung out for like an hour and a half and just dropped fucking metric tons of knowledge. It was fantastic. But we were talking a little bit about how there's an entire generation of people that can vote, are old enough to vote, who have grown up with a surveillance device running, as a natural extension of their body. And the fights for internet freedom that took place during late 90s going into 2000 and then on into Occupy and SOPA are so far removed from millions and millions of people. They just know what we have right now as the way things have always been. And so trying to reach that particular segment of the population and get them to realize that, like, no, it was not always like this. Yes, it can be different, but we need you to help make it different. It is currently one of the biggest hurdles that we have. I'm not sure how to breach that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important problem. And then on the opposite end of the age spectrum, you have people that literally don't get any information outside of the CNN and MSNBC, echo chamber. And so for those people, I've had some of those people tell me that Joe Biden's a good candidate. And why? I'll tell you why. Because they don't have any information outside of what CNN tells them. And CNN has very intelligently kept Joe Biden mostly off screen. And so those people haven't seen Joe Biden's gaffes and his talking about hairy legs and learning that he loves children to sit on his lap. They haven't seen the types of things that he said, and they either are ignorant of, don't remember, or never knew about his role with the 94 crime bill and all of these other horrendous past historical political moves he's made. So for that reason, you have people who are equally, unaware for a very different reason. And I think on both ends, I think the only thing that can really help is just exposure to independent media, and independent media continuing to fight against censorship and try to make its way out there. I think it's always going to be an uphill battle, but I think it's one worth fighting. And I'm glad you all are out there continuing to do that.
Well, thank you. I've noticed that, especially now with the release of the teach-in, that if another platform hosts it, if the platform only concerns themselves with the political horse race, they've unintentionally trained their audience to tune out everything else. And I like, without being a dick, I want to be able to have that conversation with people who do this, who are a part of the independent media. Like, if you're not giving your audience a wide range of information and lots of different things to think about, then they're only going to think about the thing that you tell them to think about. And if that thing is, you need to concern yourself about who wins what seat in a fraudulent system, I feel like you're doing a disservice there. Is that something that you've experienced too, or am I just lucky?
No, I think I agree with you, and I think that that's that's one reason that for me personally, let me back up 1 second. I think that for some independent journalists and some independent news outlets, it can be very easy. There could be a very easy slippery slope to kind of fall down, where you realize that if you sell a certain narrative, even in the independent sphere, about green politics, left politics, progressive politics, and you are a cheerleader for a certain candidate, that you will get clicks from that candidate's supporters. And it becomes really, and it doesn't have to be intentional to start out with especially, but it can be really easy to fall into that and say, well, I won't cover this because if I do, then their supporters will not like it. I won't get the clicks. People will unsubscribe. So if you're using it as your 100% source of income, it becomes really important to think about your audience, your quote unquote brand, how people are receiving you, and you end up, I don't want to say selling out, but it's very, very easy to become about the income and the views and the clicks more than about the integrity of the work you're doing. And it's a really impossible position, I think, to be in for a lot of people. And that is not the same. It's a different track to the same end of the people who kind of go out of their way from the beginning to suck up to CNN for a spot on CNN or MSNBC or one of these establishment news networks. So I think it's an unfortunate pitfall of independent journalism, that the better you are at it and the more the more successful you are financially, then the more tempting it can be to craft yourself into something that then continues to give you more and more revenue. So I think that's something that a lot of independent journalists struggle with, and it's something I've thought about a lot in the work that I do. So
yeah, and again, like, I'm not trying to like be a dick to anyone in particular, although I will, like Cenk Uygur's an easy target. He really is, because he's just fucking terrible, and he's always been terrible. In like 2004 to 2006, I was like a front pager for the Daily Kos. Not proud of this, like, at all. I'm not, but we all have a path, and I needed an outlet where I could, post my shit and have people read it. And I remember Cenk from back then. I remember how he was a brash quasi-libertarian grifter, and he found a great little niche in quote unquote progressive media because it didn't really exist outside of like Democracy Now! And Democracy Now! Wasn't that accessible, 10 or 15 years ago. And he exploited that niche perfectly, because progressives are completely without hope, and they really wanted a media presence that represented them, and they thought that they had that in the Young Turks, not realizing that the Young Turks were always going to funnel them back into the Democratic Party. I feel like Marcos Malitzis recognized that, and that's why he kept publishing Cenk and having, throwing eyes onto the Young Turks. But even people like Kyle Kulinski, who I call Tom Hartman's Padawan, are just so pigeonholed that when I try to talk to people like about Julian Assange, when I try to talk to people who are regular viewers of Kulinski's show, which is a fuck ton of people, they brush it off, or they have no fucking information whatsoever. And this is one of the reasons why Action for Assange started doing the teach-ins, is that we're hoping to get those viewers, that's the brand of media they consume. We're hoping to pull them in and at least get them to be more aware of it, because we've got about 100 days before the second round of Julian's extradition hearing begins, and we've got so much work to do.
Absolutely. And I was really impressed by the first of your teaching segments. I thought it was great. To get that much information in a short time period was awesome. And so I hope that a lot of different independent news outlets will republish and host those videos. I agree. I think that's a really good way to try and reach people in a short, concise, basic way that the average person who doesn't have a lot of information on the Assange or WikiLeaks case will be able to digest and understand easily. I think it goes right back to that issue of, basically some independent news voices having a kind of one-track niche that they've crafted, and not in any sort of, I don't think, any sort of ill will or ill intent. Just that's kind of the way it develops. And then you have these issues like Julian Assange just falling by the wayside, sometimes unintentionally, but people have to be made aware of it. It is one of the most important issues that we're facing right now, as not just a country, but as a global public. And other than you and some, World Socialist website, Consortium+News, there are some outlets that do publish on the Assange case, but not enough. Very few outlets will publish, and those that do are usually either, including misinformation, making mistakes, parroting, smear narratives. There's very few outlets that are accurately covering it, and that's a huge problem.
And that's where like MEB and Wise Up Action are so wonderful, because they're a group that will just hunt the internet for articles about Julian Assange, and then they pounce with like, you got this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, and this wrong, and here's the receipts for it, and you need to issue a retraction right fucking now. And I like, if we could, if that kind of grow, if we can get more and more people to, and not even just with specifically Julian Assange, but like just things in general, where you can show other people how they're being lied to. Like, you don't necessarily have to be the messenger itself. Like, the work that you link to can be the messenger in that case, because people really do like to shoot the fucking messenger. But I think if you can find a way to like challenge somebody's preconceived notions without, just fucking dick slapping them on the forehead with how wrong they are, then we have a chance. But again, I mean, we're down to like 102 days before this hearing, and that's a lot of foreheads to slap.
It definitely is.
I smoked a little bit of weed before the show, and I did a little bit. I'm trying to see if we have any questions in the chat here. I'm sure I missed a couple. But how familiar are you with Biden and the Ukraine gate thing?
Not terribly. I haven't done any articles on it. I haven't really covered it. I am aware that there's a whole lot of corruption in the Ukraine issue. In fact, I think it would be great if you would have Joe Laurie of Consortium+News on your show to talk about that, because he's had a lot of background with that subject. But I mean, suffice to say that it's a very, very corrupt situation on Biden's end that, of course, the media is just not even going to cover. It's going to ridicule as a conspiracy theory. They're just going to link to a bunch of Trump tweets and say, oh, look, Trump's floating this narrative, must be false. Once in a while, Trump tweets something that might have some sort of factual backing, even if he, uses too many exclamation marks and can't type. Sometimes there's a fact or two behind it. So, I think there's obviously masses. And I think also that brings us back to the fact that that's one of the reasons that Biden is such a great candidate for the corrupt establishment. That's exactly why. They don't look at that and think, oh, gee, that's real bad, we'll have to like hide that. They're like, oh yeah, that vets him. Good deal. So I mean, there's that, and then there's the fact that I think as well, like just returning to Biden as a candidate, I think that it's really clear to me anyway that I can't see him taking the debate stage. I don't think he's going to be really on the ballot in November. I think it's going to be either Hillary Clinton or somebody like that who's going to come out of the wings and save the Democratic Party. And you may look at that as a conspiracy theory, but I think that's pretty obvious at this point.
No, you are absolutely right, and this is something that we've at least on this show and on the vigils have kind of discussed in terms of like they can't just let him go. There's no way. The guy's got instant grits in his head where his brains are supposed to be. Like, not even the good kind of grits that takes you 20 minutes to cook. But yeah, I don't think that the DNC is cynical enough to run Hillary Clinton. I know that they are, without moral whatsoever. I know that there's no trace of humanity or dignity in it, but they've got to find somebody as malleable as Joe Biden. And that's going to be their problem, because Joe will go out and he'll say things that he has no idea what he's saying, and he'll have no memory of having said them after the fact. Like there isn't a candidate more perfect to go and deliver a message of empire and austerity and let's like, fuck no, I'm not going to pass your Medicare for all. We're going to defend and strengthen the Obamacare that fucking just broke so many people. He's perfect for that. And if I think that they're going to, if they do try to pull something dumb, I definitely think that they're going to try to like push a Kamala Harris on people, which would be the most fucking retarded thing that they could possibly do. And if anybody's offended by the word retarded, I'm very sorry.
And I think it's also amusing to go back to the fact that even before this obvious cognitive decline set in for Biden, I mean, you go back way back when he was first elected as this, famously young senator. And and they said to him, why was it that these people wouldn't support you? I think they were referring to corporations at the time. And he said, well, they thought that I was young and I wasn't corrupt and I wouldn't take their money or something like that. And basically the quote was, he said, but they don't get it. I am corrupt. I'm just like you. I'm just a young corrupt person. I mean, he literally said the phrase, I am corrupt. So, he has statements like that going back decades. Then you add the cognitive decline to it, and it's just a complete, I mean, it's more of a, unscripted show than WWE ever was in terms of just the random nonsensical stuff that he will say.
Rob Juno, thank you for the super chat. And Rob would like to know when you first heard about Julian Assange and what kind of got you interested in writing about it, and even going into, like the Unity for J vigils, Decipher You, which of course was Snowden, but similar subject matter.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I was aware of Julian Assange for years, but I wasn't, I was, pursuing my bachelor's degree and just being a normal non-journalistic person. So I wasn't particularly, doing any sort of activism at that time. But then when 2016 happened, and when I saw the lies being spread about Assange, when I saw the completely and overtly false narratives that the media were pushing about WikiLeaks, and also about the Hillary Clinton issue, about the entire way that was spun by mainstream press was so clearly false that I realized that anybody could do better. Literally, it's kind of like what people like Jimmy Dore talk about. It's like, if he as a comedian can do better than them, then anybody can do better. Well, that's how I felt. I was just like, well, I can throw a couple of sentences together and do better than this. And so when I also saw the way that he was, in prison, basically, in asylum in the embassy, but being cut off from the internet the first time in October of 2016, that really rang an alarm bell for me as well. So it was all of that together that was the impetus for kind of starting to do my own version of independent journalism, which at the beginning, I didn't think of myself as a journalist. I was just somebody who was putting their opinion out there. And then some people took me seriously, and now I guess I'm a journalist. That's how it kind of developed. But definitely Assange and WikiLeaks was a major reason for starting to write about politics and news. And it was also that 2016 was really the time in which I threw my hat in the ring and starting to support WikiLeaks. Now, the Decipher You project with Susie Dawson was a little later. I think that was began around September, October of 2017. So I'd been writing for about a year. And then we worked together on a number of different things. The Decipher You obviously was around the Snowden documents, which, again, I know we've talked about this before, but that archive has now been taken down by The Intercept. So even if we wanted to do that again, we couldn't. That's gone. And I think that was a really sore point as far as Julian Assange was concerned. I know on Twitter he talked about that fact, but that's a side rant. But basically, when Julian Assange in I believe it was March of 2018, was cut off from the outside world by the Ecuadorian government in the embassy, Susie immediately jumped into action with Kin.com. They did a Reconnect Julian vigil that lasted about 10 hours, 12 hours. And I mean, personally, at that time, I thought that this was going to be another 2016 event where they were going to cut him off for a week or two, and then he would be back. I don't think any of us, I think at the beginning, we kind of hoped that it would be a one-off thing. He would get his internet back, and things would kind of go back to the unacceptable normal that it had been previously. But when it didn't, when a couple of weeks went by and nothing had changed, then it turned into, from a Reconnect Julian one-off vigil, it turned into the Unity4J project, which then developed almost on its own, just kind of in a similar way to the way that my own independent journalism sort of developed without me really trying to force it. Unity4J kind of developed and, turned into this movement, which then lasted, I think, about a year and a half, if I remember right.
Yeah. And I really I can't give enough love to that series, the people that you brought on, the people that you brought together, and the information that was getting introduced to people, for a lot of whom for the very first time, was so critical. And there's a lot of overlap between at least the people who supported Unity4J, who also support action for Assange. It's kind of hard at this point to not to separate the two, but because we work with Kitty fairly frequently, and Paula, and the at least the on the ground people or the behind the scenes people are so very important to what Action for Assange does. It's just what I don't think I've ever actually thanked you for doing that series, because they're really, honestly, the reason that Andrew put together the vigils was because it had been about a month and a half, I think, since there was a Unity4J, and we all really, really missed it.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you all took that torch and ran with it. Honestly, I'm really glad that you all have done the work that you've done, and I don't think I require any thanks whatsoever. I mean, it was an honor to be a part of it. I think, it's one of those things where no matter who's doing the supporting or what name the supporting happens under, I just would observe that the people that do publicly support Assange are always going to be attacked pretty hardcore. Whatever you want to call that, it's very, very intense. As soon as I think the journalism and the activism that I've done for Assange had more of a strong and intense pushback than any other subject I ever covered, and I think that's what makes it so important to continue, activism and supporting and kind of covering, because it is obviously one of the most hot button topics that you can possibly go around. The Guccifer 2 stuff, I got called a Russian bot, but it wasn't anywhere near the intensity that Assange coverage seemed to warrant.
So Liz Muller said something to me the other day, and that was she had noticed that the first people that really got hit with the "you're a Russian asset" or "you're a Russian bot" smear were the TPP activists. And it's her opinion, which is developing into an actual theory, that Russiagate itself and all the impeachment and everything is a corollary of TPP not being the law of the land now, and that the same unelected, unaccountable global predator class that was behind TPP and the ISDS court system and whatnot are part and parcel of the whole Russiagate narrative.
That's an interesting theory. I haven't really thought of it from that perspective, but I respect it. I mean, I think that's an interesting thought. I'd have to kind of consider that. But I was aware of the TPP issue, and I didn't do direct activism for that in the time frame that Liz did. But I really respect the activists that did, and I think it was a huge subject. And I think that brings me back to the fact that the reason WikiLeaks and activism in support of WikiLeaks is so targeted is not just because of what they've already published. It's because they have the potential to uncover so much more. It's because of what they could do. That they are, I mean, it's on every subject imaginable that they would be able to, you know, basically unlock for the public. So that's why it makes them so much more dangerous to the establishment and the corrupt establishment than discussing one particular issue or another, whether that's, you know, the corrupt DNC, election rigging, human trafficking, whatever. Those are limited subjects with a limited time span of relevance, whereas WikiLeaks will always have relevance. It will always be dangerous to them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and some credit needs to go to the Gray Zone for not letting the OPCW leak story die. The last couple of things that Aaron Mate has put out about that, really, I mean, should be, you know, earth-shattering revelations on top of the 4 WikiLeaks drops on the OPCW leaks back, starting, I believe, October of last year. Not 100% on that. It might have been September, but but that story in particular, OPCW, it is so that slept on, but indicative of how American foreign policy really works. Like that it's an all encompassing, we're going to smother you with the pillow of imperialism. And if you try to make a sound, we've muffled you so well that hardly anyone will be able to hear it. Yeah, I'm not gonna. I will say that real quick. I will say that like there are still avenues for whistleblowers to come forth. There are still ways that people can get material to WikiLeaks. And if you like Kevin, the NSA agent who is tasked to monitoring our chat right now, Kevin, you can still become a whistleblower. There are people who will help you with that process.
There you go. I like it. And I think it's great that you brought up the Gray Zone. They're an exceptional outlet, absolutely fantastic on WikiLeaks coverage and also on American foreign policy in general. They're my favorite foreign policy related news source. And then Kevin Gostolo over at Shadowproof also does a fantastic job covering WikiLeaks. So, you know, Shadowproof, the Gray Zone, Consortium+News, World Socialist website, those are some of the very few that you can pretty much trust to cover WikiLeaks accurately. And, you know, there needs to be more like that. And whenever I see somebody, you know, spitting the truth on social media or whatever, I just hope they make their own website. You know, I want there to be more independent journalists, more independent outlets like that, rather than anyone viewing it as like a competition for, you know, like credibility or something like that. There has to be more people that take it at their own initiative and say, hey, you know what? I can do better than Rachel Maddow in my sleep. So I will. Yeah. You know, yeah. So again, I think I do this every time I go on your show, but it's like, please, for the love of God, if you know how to put sentences together, please do. If you have the time to take a couple hours out of a day, a few days a week, put something together, throw it on a blog somewhere, because the more that people do that, you know, the less, not only the less people that might, you know, be in their echo chambers of ignorance, but also the less alone other people feel who also are aware of these inconsistencies and these propagandist narratives that are spread by the media. And so that validation through numbers like that builds into a movement that's decentralized but powerful. And so I hope people listening will say to themselves, I can be an independent journalist. You know, it's not something I have to be qualified or licensed to do. I can do it. You know.
Yeah, and this is it. There's no like certification process that you have to go through to be a journalist in the US. What you need is a pair of eyes and a way to communicate what you see. There's a decent amount of support that goes on in the independent media world. And there are certainly really, really supportive, you know, content creators and journalists that, you know, will just widely share everybody else's work. But there's also a real cliquey aspect to it. And there's, you know, different clubs and there's old beefs, and and there's also this like weird status thing to independent media where trying to get like certain people onto the vigils, for example, it has proven pretty difficult just because we're not big enough. Well, we can't be big enough until people come on the show that have a large following, come on, and then they bring, and that's how you expand the thing. Is that something that you notice too? Like the little, they have their own squads and shit.
Oh, absolutely. And that's part of human behavior in general. I mean, it's like, it can be a lot like high school, who's cool and who's in with who and all that sort of thing, unfortunately. But that's why I think it's so important that people just stand up and make their own small independent voice heard, because the more people do that separately, the less cliquey things are. And I think, there is a barrier. There is a point in which, maybe nobody's hearing what you're saying because you are very small, but the longer that you keep just talking and putting your words out there, the more people will gravitate to what you're saying naturally. Now, will that get you an income you can live on? No, it won't. And if you go into it thinking that that's what you're going to get, then really you shouldn't be doing it. And I'm not saying that because I think that earning money for journalism is bad in any way whatsoever, but it's just that you can't expect that quickly at all to happen. And but yes, with a small audience, you obviously have it's not so much less of an impact, but you will have trouble getting people over. I know what you're talking about, getting people of a certain like stature onto your show and stuff like that. But it's the time you put into it, you slowly build up not just numbers, but a sense of support from the people that watch you or read your work and stuff like that. And then I think that slowly then builds up into credibility that has nothing to do with Twitter followers or subscribers. It becomes something that people know about you. And I think, at least that's how it developed. Is it was very slow, and it wasn't something where I just got popular and then people respected me. It was more like I just kept doing the work. And then the work kind of speaks for itself after an amount of time.
And yours certainly does. I mean, the entire reason that I asked you on the show the original time anyway is because I had found that when I was breaking down stories on a live stream, it was constantly referring to your work. And then I was like, well, shit, maybe I should just have the person what wrote it come on the show and, she could explain it instead of me, because sometimes I fuck up. And like really when it comes to journalism, I hate trying to represent somebody else's work, even if I'm just explaining it. Like I feel really weird about it, but I'm also one of those people that when I write, like if you're my editor, I just want you to fix the punctuation and the spelling if those are where my mistakes are, and not to rewrite what I wrote. Like, I'll fucking freak out. I freaked out on Taylor once. It was fucking funny.
That's exactly how I feel. I mean, honestly, to be really frank, that's how I feel about subjects like Guccifer 2, for example, because I can cover work by Adam, and I have done my own journalism on it, but I feel like people like Adam Carter, Forensic, their analysis really stands on its own and needs to be heard. So I kind of hate being interviewed on that subject because A, I'm not technical, but B, there are analysts out there doing the real dirty work in the trenches, covering the details, and I wish that their voices were heard more. So I mean, I don't mean to do a straight up plug for Adam Carter, but seriously, look up his name, look up his latest article on Consortium+News. It's 3 years worth of work in the making, and it's really worth the read. But
it is. That's a fantastic article. I should grab it real quick and throw it in the chat before. I don't know how much time you have left. We've been going about an hour, but I will make sure that link gets in there real quick. The chat is talking a little bit about Crystal Ball. Would you care to opine on Crystal Ball?
I think when it comes to individual personalities in either news or in politics, like we were talking earlier about Howie Hawkins and Russiagate, I think I try to take the stance that Caitlin Johnstone's talked about taking a bunch of times, which is you don't latch on to personalities. You just support the idea when it's a good idea or a good point or a good story or a good article, and you don't latch onto somebody as a personality. And when there's an incorrect statement or there's something you disagree with, then you push back respectfully. You say, okay, maybe this is, incorrect. And so that's the approach I would take with Crystal Ball and anybody else that has a large platform. Sometimes she gets it right, sometimes she doesn't. I don't know what her intentions are. I can't know anybody's intention, but that's kind of my stance. And especially after 2016, I mean, for a minute there, I thought, Tulsi Gabbard was pretty authentic, and I didn't, I was like, oh, cool, she's saying the right things about Hillary Clinton. Like, that's great. But I never latched onto her as a personality. I never was like officially endorsing her or anything like that. And when she would do something like defend Ellen DeGeneres hanging out with George W. Bush, I push back on that and say, look, that's ridiculous. This is disappointing. What are you doing? And so I think I give that example as the way that I look at most people in this sphere, which is that sometimes they say something great and sometimes they say something ridiculous, and you support them when they say something great and you push back when they say something ridiculous. And that's the way I would hope people would treat me too if they think I say something that's off the beam,
Fair enough. I personally think that Crystal Ball is on the air at a, pretty established conservative outlet, paired with someone who's still an active member of the Federalist Society, because they need to distract the entire block of Bernie Sanders voting base. I could be wrong about that, but their show is basically, we're going to shit on establishment Democrats, and we're going to rah-rah the people that we know are never going to get into office. And what Crystal does really, really well when she's delivering, a monologue, breaking down a story, Sagar and Njidi is right there to kind of like slip in the Republican talking points along with it. And I think it's more of like I don't know, like a red herring than anything else. They've got someone that's arguably, attractive and shiny that people can watch, that isn't going to tell them anything they don't already know, isn't going to challenge their mental acumen whatsoever. And it's well-produced pablum and confirmation bias to make sure that disaffected voters don't suddenly, get that little bit of team spirit and go all in for Joe Biden.
Wow, that's it. I wouldn't disagree with that. Like I said, I think she says some correct things, but I am not sitting here saying that she's this great personality everybody should just go support and like not question or not be skeptical of what she does. I think you can, and I think people should have that same skepticism towards everybody. I don't think that anyone should be hero worshipped. I think that, we can talk, like, for example, like we've talked before a little bit about The Intercept and Glenn Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald has done great journalism. He's a great journalist. And there are some things he's done that I really disagree with, but do I sit here and like throw punches at him? No, I just disagree with and publicly disagree with some of the things he's done. You can do that without like deciding to just attack somebody personally. And in the same vein, in the opposite side of things, you can support someone's ideas and their journalism, whatever, without just, becoming their cheerleader as a cult of personality. And that's one of the most important things, I think, for people who are consumers of independent news or supporters of independent politicians, is not to confuse good ideas with a personality cult.
You're absolutely right. Do you so I have I guess it started out as a joke, but now I'm pretty sure that it's the way things are. But I observed that, or I stated that all of the emo kids from the early 2000s are all grown up and running the DSA now. And that's why they just are so terrible and hard to relate to. You think I'm onto something?
I think it's a possibility. I mean, I won't deny that that's possible. You know, I think it's a good joke, and maybe there's a germ of truth somewhere in that. But yeah, I mean, you know, that generation. I mean, I'm kind of part of that generation, I suppose. But it's just, I think for my generation and anybody younger, it can be tempting to look at somebody like Bernie Sanders and say, "Oh, my savior, he's gonna really change things for the young people," or whatever. Or AOC is gonna, she represents me. She's young like me. She's, she's saying some good things. She's standing up in, she's like, "Oh man, let's support her." And the thing is, I agree with what Chris Hedges said a million times, and others in the independent media have said, which is that electoral politics is not where you're going to get change. And so whether it's, DSA or anything else, I just think we have to start moving outside of that paradigm, because it's just, we didn't get change with Obama. Citibank chose his cabinet. We're not going to get change from anybody else, because anybody who would give us change is going to be completely shut out by the DNC. Third parties aren't going to get anywhere because they're going to be shut out in elections too and cheated just as badly, if not worse. So we have to stop thinking that a vote is like activism. It's not activism. It's literally signing your name, in my opinion, signing your name away to the people counting that vote to do with whatever they want. And so if people would let go of that as a form of being politically active, they might be forced to try to actually become politically active, and starting in their own communities.
No, you're 100% correct on that. I've said on this show a number of times that voting is the laziest and least effective political action that anyone can take, especially at the federal level. Like, you've got different kinds of demons that run the city council in your town, but those are, at least here, they're tech startups and developers. And like, that's it, because I live in a county that has fucking Santa Cruz in it, and it's a tourist beach town with a UC school, which I don't know if you know about this or not, but like a week and a half ago, Vice dropped an article, which I don't normally read Vice. Like, it's not one of my go-tos, but because it had the university in the town that or county that I live in, my eyeballs went to it. Military grade and FBI surveillance was used on grad students who had organized a wildcat strike, and it was used to track and, in at least one case, intimidate the organizers. And if this is happening at UC Santa Cruz, I guarantee you that it happens at every major university, and more than likely even at community colleges.
Oh, completely agree. Absolutely. And I think it's horrendous, but unsurprising as well. Unfortunately, that's the kind of surveillance state that we live in already.
It's even more nuts because Angela Davis is still a professor emeritus at UCSC. This is where Huey fucking Newton went to get his PhD. And while he was a UC student, they tried to hem him up on a fake murder charge. They tried to pin a shooting on him, which ultimately got dropped because of a complete lack of evidence. But when someone like Huey P. Newton is in your neighborhood and they're going for a PhD, and oh God, I'm gonna fucking forget it. But yeah, no, it's a fascinating story. And this is, I mean, it's supposed to be a place that's like the home of radical campus activism. It's supposed to be, a beacon of progressive values. And to this, at least right now, out of the 82 or 88 grad students that got fired, TAs got straight fired for their participation. Most of them got suspended for a couple of weeks. The one dude that's suspended for 2 years is the one brown kid who is the only person in his neighborhood to go to college 1, grad school 2. He's a PhD, or he was a PhD student. He had to volunteer 24 hours a week at a group home just so he could survive, because the stipend they were paying him to be a TA was so miserably low. So you've got a guy who's not only teaching classes and is in, you know, grad school for his PhD, but he's also working the better part of a 40-hour work week overnight at a group home just to survive, not to be able to like vacation 3 weeks, you know, in the summer, but just to fucking pay bills. And they're going to track and surveil and intimidate that guy, and they're going to kick him out of school for 2 years. It's fuck. Oh, but the president of the UC system is Janet Napolitano, former director of the Department of Homeland Security.
Perfect.
Which is fascinating to me.
How you couldn't, that just ties it up with a bow, you know. Just, and I don't mean to turn the tables on interviewer and interviewee, but I'm sure you've talked about this before on your show, but I'm curious as to how exactly your journalism shifted from, you know, appearing in the Daily Kos and stuff like that to the type of journalism that you do now. You probably told that story before, but I would just like to hear it.
You know, it's okay. In 2008, I became a part of the nation's election blog team. And I like, it was really cool, man. Like, it was the first time there was really a you know, serious online presence in a presidential election. And I got to interview Mike Gravel, and I got to interview Dennis Kucinich. And of course, after Iowa, both those guys were gone. So I started, you know, trying to check out John Edwards, because I was always going to write for who appeared to be like the furthest left candidate. I had not involved myself in like two-party politics for a while. And when I started writing for Co's and a couple other outlets, like, it was a way to get a more outsider perspective on the you know, on the duopoly. But at any rate, gearing up towards the California primary that year, I had spent a lot of time researching Barack Obama, because Edwards was gone. He's a fucking heartless slimeball bastard, cheating whore, you know, just fucking him and his $400 haircut had to go somewhere else. And I really learned who Barack Obama was, and I learned who was propping him up. And I learned a lot about the kinds of decisions that you could expect him to make in a position of perceived power. And so I wrote an article called Barack Obama, Reagan with a Tan. And I got fired and subsequently blacklisted. And in fact, all of the things that I had written for the Nation were completely fucking scrubbed from that website.
Why am I not shocked?
And this is when Chris Hayes was still the politics editor, so he was technically my boss. It was before he got his big show there. So I was sort of wandering in the wilderness for a number of years. Like, nobody would pick me up. If I would write for an emerging outlet, within like 3 to 6 months, it would be scooped up by another outlet, and then they would shit can everybody. And that happened a couple of times too many to like just be coincidence. Like, maybe it's my own paranoia, but it felt like a targeting. So at that point, like, why not just go all out on any conceivable platform that I possibly could? And I just recently started writing again. It's been a really long time since I actually like sat down and wrote something, 2017 or something like that. But I got to write about what happened at UCSC, and I got to interview the guy who was, you know, suspended for 2. His name's Carlos Cruz, a hell of a dude, because our town is starting a new local monthly print paper. And I had previously written for the last paper here. So I got roped into doing that. I'm going to be writing on the Anonymous Worldwide website. I really need to start writing content for the A4A website. But yeah, I mean, I ran out of fucks to give, and I realized that I still had a lot to say about shit. And somebody tell me that like scope determines relatability, scope of experience determines relatability. And I've had a pretty fucking weird life. And I've done a ton of shit, and I've been pretty much I've been to all 50 states in the US, no fewer than 3 times, but most of them multiple times. Been to a number of foreign countries, and at least in this sandbox that we're playing in terms of like independent media, I would be hard pressed to find someone who, no matter what the situation is, could answer like, okay, I totally understand that. I get that. I've seen it, or I've lived it, and I've been it. So that's kind of like where I'm at. And then when Andrew got a hold of me saying that he had an idea to pick up the vigils, and would I be a part of it? I was like, well, fuck yeah. And now it's I still have a day job, but I'm basically doing organizing full time, and doing the show, Slow News, this show. But I'm like as burnout as I should be. I'm not, because the urgency behind what we're doing here with, trying to make sure that Julian Assange doesn't get shoved into a fucking supermax for, 175 years. It's a real motivator, like the death of press freedom, the fact that like I would not be able to do this more than likely if he gets 17 Espionage Act charges. Like independent media is fucked. Organizing and activism in general is fucked. And one of the things that like we try to stress on the vigils is that it doesn't matter what your cause is, what you're trying to organize for, what point you're trying to get across through activism. If we don't have access to a free flow of unspun information, we are never going to be able to have a conversation with people. And that's why this isn't about politics. It's about being post-partisan, because we can't even talk politics until we know what the fuck we're talking about. And we're not going to know what the fuck we're talking about if we've got people on TV telling us, bits and pieces of a story with 85% political spin in a narrow realm of center right to far right, and then having it be sold to us as 100% of the political spectrum.
Of course. And, and behind the scenes, working with the DNC or the Hillary campaign or now the Biden campaign, and crafting stories, crafting narratives. And in 2016, basically giving Trump free airtime on the DNC's order because he was one of their Pied Pipers, that whole thing. All of that wouldn't have been known without WikiLeaks. So the relevance, the importance, the significance of WikiLeaks, and then the significance of Assange being charged under the Espionage Act 17 times, it can't be overstated. It just can't. And it's just absolutely the most important issue of our time.
Well, and I know so many people whose lives were so viscerally affected just by the release of collateral murder. Like whether or not they're an activist in the movement, I've heard people say this fucking video changed the way that I saw everything. And that's a moment in time that you can take anywhere and show people, like this encapsulated 20 minutes is what the US empire is. It's who it's what a volunteer army does, or not a volunteer, and you're either Danny Sherson says you're either drafted out of poverty or you go in because you really want to kill someone.
Exactly. It's an economic draft and psychopaths for sure.
But I think that I'm gonna go ahead and wrap. Thank you so much, dude. I fucking love it when you're on the show. Please let people know where they can find you and where they can find your work, and the next CN Live show maybe.
Sure. Yeah, we just published a CN Live episode on Russiagate. I believe there are a few more to come in the next few weeks on different subjects. Obviously, we'll still be covering COVID-19 and all that. I have a few articles in the works, which will be, hopefully out in the next short while. But, you can find me on Twitter at Elizabeth+Lea+Vos. You can also find me on Facebook and basically every other alternative social media site imaginable under my name. I'm a freelance journalist. I contribute mostly to Consortium+News, so you can find my work there. And obviously CN Live, I'm a co-host there every time we do a segment. So that's where you can find me. And thank you for having me on again. It's always a pleasure, and best of luck with the Action for Assange activism.
Hell yeah. Thank you. That's going to do it for Slow News Day. We, well, shit, we love you guys. Sunday, I'm either going to have Sam Tripoli or Jared Beck, or I'm going to have Sam Tripoli and Jared Beck, which would be insane and would be a lot like, three white dudes screaming at each other in agreement for like 2 hours.
Sounds like a great episode to me. Anytime Jared Beck's anywhere or Elizabeth Beck or anywhere, it's an amazing time. They're great.
It really is. I love those guys. Saturday on the Free Assange Vigil, we're having Eleanor Goldfield on, and hopefully Deepa Driver, but I haven't checked that message box in a little bit. And yeah, thank you guys so much. Fucking thank you to Sleepy Josh on the ones and twos as always. And this has been Slow News.